Hey guys, so today we are going to be looking at the water cycle. A few questions to look at while we're examining these graphs. What does the chart tell you about water? Okay, so looking at what about water, what about fresh water, and what about surface water? So water is going to refer to total water. So we have a few different categories for water. We have oceans, which is 96.5% of our water. We have other saline or salt water, which is 0.9% of the world's water. And then we have fresh water, which is 2.5% of the world's water is fresh water. So then it takes just this 2.5% and it zooms it in and says, well, what about just fresh water? For the fresh water of the world, we have 68.7% that's part of glaciers or ice caps. Then we have about 30.1% that is groundwater. And 1.2% of this 2.5% is surface or other fresh water. So then they take this 1.2%, that's a portion of this 2.5%, and they zoom into that for the surface and other fresh water. So of this 1.2% surface water, 69% of it is ground ice and permafrost. And then 20.9% are in lakes. We have 3.8% that is soil moisture. We have the green swamps and marshes, that's 2.6%. Rivers is 0.49%. And we have 0.26% that's in living things. And 3% of our water is in the atmosphere. So when we look at all of that different data about water, try and look and figure out how much water can we actually drink of all of this water that exists. All right, so now we're going to look at how the water cycle actually works now that we've looked at where water is on Earth. Okay, so we have a few things labeled here in our scene. We have the sun up here. This is going to symbolize the ocean. We have trees that are going to symbolize all living things. We have groundwater. It's underneath some rock and soil. We have some clouds. We have a stream on our mountains up here. Okay, so now we're going to see how these things all are interacting. All right, so our first step in the water cycle is from the ocean. We have water that is going to turn into vapor because of the heat of the sun. So the heat of the sun heats up the water and it becomes water vapor. And that is going to increase into the atmosphere, which is that process is called evaporation. So our first step is we have evaporation of water vapor. Okay, so the water vapor is going to evaporate in from the ocean into the atmosphere, which is then going to collect, and it's going to condense. What we'll see next is the condensation in the clouds, where the water vapor forms together into a unit that we refer to as clouds. So in the cloud state, eventually you get so much water vapor that they become very heavy, and we start to have from the clouds, this process called precipitation. So we have precipitation in the form of snow or in the form of rain. So the snow is going onto our mountains that have ice cap on it, some glaciers, some snow. And then we have precipitation that's joining either our stream or going straight back into the ocean. Okay, so precipitation can come either in the form of snow or in the form of rain. Okay, so that's our next step. Of course, in the clouds, if it's coming down as rain, then it stayed in the liquid state. But if it comes down as snow, then freezing happened somewhere in this cloud. The process of freezing, getting into our third state of matter where we have solid water. Okay, so once we have the precipitation, then what you'll see happening is the process known as infiltration. And that really just means that the water seeps in to the ground, in this case, into our mountain. So infiltration, the precipitation, the snow or the rainwater is going to seep into the ground. And then you'll have right here, we have what's known as runoff. So when the water goes off of the mountainside into the ocean again, that's known as runoff. So that is part of our water cycle. The other part of our water cycle that happens over here with our trees, living things. Okay, so with our trees, what can happen is from this groundwater, this water that's underneath the ground, we'll have from the roots, the trees will essentially drink the water, and that's called capillary action. So where the trees are kind of drinking up the groundwater, that's known as capillary action because they use what's called capillaries. Their roots are a form of capillary, and they're bringing the water from the ground into themselves as trees. And so then what also happens from the trees back into the sky to become clouds, we have this process known as evapotranspiration. Evapotranspiration is basically where your water is evaporating from your trees. So that's the evap part. And the transpiration is the fact that it's coming through the trees and then becoming part of your atmosphere to condense into the clouds to then become precipitation, and it just kind of continues, right? So I have a little diagram here of many parts of the water cycle. I'm going to look at landforms that are related to the water cycle, okay? So right up here in this top corner, we have a lake. So we're fairly familiar with lakes here in the Midwest. There's lakes lots of places in the Midwest, and lakes generally are full of fresh water, but there can be salt water in some lakes around the world. Below that, many are very familiar with the ocean. We use that in our diagram of the water cycle as major bodies of water. We have mountains, the snow on the mountains, very important to holding a lot of our freshwater sources, and many of our rivers start in the mountains, and then the water begins to melt, and we have the beginning that's the source of many of our rivers around the world. Okay, so right here is a great picture of a river delta. So river deltas are where your river gets kind of spread out into a number of different kind of like tributaries where you're flowing into a larger body of water, maybe a sea, maybe an ocean. And so the water really begins to slow down and it gets caught with a lot of sediment, soil, sand, etc. And it forms this triangle shape. If you're familiar a little bit with letters, if you're a little bit familiar with Greek letters, the Greek letter delta is a triangle. So delta is a relatively commonly used Greek letter in a lot of things, math, and in a lot of different Greek communities. So it's a fairly well-known Greek letter, but its form, it is a triangle. So it makes sense that a delta is shaped like a triangle. Not a perfect triangle, but it has kind of a triangle shape. Okay. Probably there's a lot of different river deltas. I think that one of the probably most commonly used examples would be the Nile River Delta. The Nile River has a pretty commonly seen triangle shape as it enters Mediterranean Sea. So the arrow is pointing to this small stream that's going into a larger river. So this small stream is known as a tributary because it's contributing to the larger body of water, right? In this case, the larger river. Okay, so a tributary goes into a larger river. And then we have what's known as aquifers. This is probably the most difficult as far as vocabulary terms that we have. So an aquifer is where groundwater kind of gets trapped in between layers of earth. So you start with a very, very solid, you can see it's labeled, it's colored brown, it's labeled bedrock. So you're with a very solid rock that doesn't let water just keep trickling down into the earth. And so that's very solid layer of rock. And then above it, you have just this kind of pool almost of water where you have a bunch of water. And then on top of your water, you have your land that we are all on top of. So underneath, you're going to have just like a bunch of fresh water from rain that's going to be kind of just collecting above this very solid bedrock that keeps it from just trickling down. And then you have a layer of land on top. So it's just kind of like sandwiched in the middle. And a lot of times, this is where you might end up having a natural spring come from it, or wells often will drill into dig out below the ground, the surface ground, into the aquifer. And so a lot of times, this is a nice store of fresh water for periods of drought. That's kind of what naturally would be used for. You will look at different places around the world where we use water faster than you have rain, precipitation coming down to fill back up the aquifers. And so that, you can imagine, causes a lot of different problems around the world. But aquifers, not the most commonly run into landform related to the water cycle, but very important. And there's many things that go into having aquifers. Illustrating your own flow of water from the rainfall into the sea or ocean, and you're going to label these different things. You're going to label a river, you're going to include a delta, a mountain, an aquifer, a tributary. You're going to have evaporation, condensation, and precipitation in the form of snow and rain, ocean, and transpiration, or evapotranspiration, however you want to say it. And your grade will be on neatness and accuracy. So you're going to like I drew on the board, you're going to draw your own version of the water cycle, and you're going to include some of these terms that we just went over. Okay? And then with that, you're going to write about how humans use water, why do we need water, and how our usage of water can affect us and affect how the water is itself.